I'm Professor Raphaël Moeckli. I'm head of the radiotherapy department in CHUV in Lausanne. I'm in charge of the clinical transfer for physics in CHUV.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emil Schüler. I'm an assistant professor at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. I'm the physics lead of the strategic research initiative within FLASH Radiotherapy at the institution, and also lead the clinical translation aspects from the physics side.
So I will start my presentation first. So first of all, I would like to thank IntraOp for having invited me in that symposium. So I will talk about the beam monitoring and clinical translation for ultra high dose rate electron therapy. My conflict of interest are the following. I have a grant from Moeckli, which is not related to FLASH research, and we have in general in CHUV collaborations with PMB, IntraOp, and the CERN. So the question of dosimetries is obviously something very important in the clinical transfer of FLASH therapy. And one of the problems we have is that we don't have any traceability at the moment. So we use redundant dosimetric measurements as presented by Claude Bela this morning. And the idea is to take different dosimeters with different detecting principle and then do measurements with these detectors and demonstrate that the dose that is obtained is the same for the different detectors, which means then that we can be confident in the dose we measure. So we obtained an agreement that was within more or less 3% for ultra high dose rate and within 2% for the conventional. Then afterwards, we have to translate that reference dosimetry to dosimetric parameters for the treatments or for the experiments. And we developed some procedure for different setups, because when we irradiate mice, zebrafish, pigs, or even patients, this is not the same, and then the dosimetry is changed, and we have to adapt of it. And when we did apply these procedures to biological irradiation, we went from 15% of deviations to less than 3%. So this was, but this is quite time consuming, because all of that is done with passive dosimeters. And also for the first patient, we did some sort of sandwiching of dosimetry for when in having pre-treatment dosimetry and different with different measurements, and also in vivo dosimetry and post dosimetry, and then we checked that the dose were correct between the pre-treatment and the post-treatment, so that we could expect that during the treatment this was the same. Then for the clinical transfer, the problem is that we still have alaline pellets, TLDs, etc. And this is quite, as I said, time consuming to prepare the irradiations. And we would like to have something which is more online dosimetry. So for the clinical transfer, obviously we do some beam commissioning, as shown here with the PDDs and the profiles, also evaluation of the output factors for the different energies and positions, and also some reference dosimetry, in particular the evaluation of the dose purpose according to the different configurations. So we have done that on the Mobitron machine, and after that, at the same or similar in a similar time, we have done some evaluation of possible beam monitoring, first on the ERT6, which is the machine that is the one most used for research in FLASH in CHUV in Lausanne, and we have added a beam current transformer at the exit of the machine. This is the scheme view in front and laterally. And we have a beam current transformer which is measuring the current going outside of the machine. And we did investigate different parameters in pulse repetition frequency and pulse width. And this is an example of what we obtained. The blue one is the BCT, which is placed at for measuring the gun current, and this is the exit current that we measure going outside of the machine. So we have measured the stability of the system or the linearity with the between the dose and the charge for different frequencies and for different pulse widths, and you see that you can see that we have quite good linearity for each of the pulse lengths, but the linearity is not the same for the different pulse lengths. However, we have something which is quite good in reproducibility, and the deviation from linear is about plus or minus 2%. Then we went to the Mobitron machine, and we have added the BCT at the exit of the machine, at the beam exit, and we have done somehow the same exercise. So this is an example of the conventional a conventional pulse, which is not so good, but as you can imagine, there are plenty of. So this is not as sensitive as that, and we obtained a linearity between the dose and the BCT total charge, which is quite good. Doing the same exercise with the HDR, we have on the left the pulse shape that we obtained for the 6 MeV beam, and on the right for the 9 MeV beam for the different pulse lengths that you can see on the graphs. And the first thing that we were able to do was to measure the different nominal value, compare the different nominal values with measurements with the BCTs. And as you can see, the pulse repetition frequency is quite good. The number of pulse measured is also quite good, and the pulse width also. This value is a bit depending on the nominal value, which is not clearly defined. So that's why we have probably a small difference here, but which is probably not sensitive. The linearity with pulse width and pulse repetition frequency is shown here, quite good for both energies. And if in the global linearity is shown here with the different pulse widths, the different pulse widths and the pulse on the pulse repetition frequency for the 6 MeV and the 9 MeV beam. Last thing is the stability of the system. So globally, when measuring the dose and the charge, the stability is for the short term within 2%. For the long term, this is up to 4%. This is a bit depending. This is a multiple stability, so to say, between the measurement of the dose and the BCT. So this is a bit high due to that. So in conclusion, there's a clear need of an equivalent of a transmission chamber for the clinical transfer of FLASH therapy. This is not only for safety, but mainly for safety, for the monitoring and the controlling of the beam, but also for the beam dose setup in order not to have to do plenty of measurements and time-consuming measurements in order to get the good dosimetry for doing the irradiations. And then the beam current transformers may be of interest. They allow us to characterize the pulse shape, and the resolution is quite high. It's linear with dose. It is a pulse counter, so it works. This is quite stable and repeatable. And this is quite fast in the sense that the frequency of acquisition of the data is very high. So that allows us to imagine that we can not only control the beam between each pulse, but also within one pulse. But this is the future. And for the clinical transfer on a real machine, I will leave the floor to Professor Schüler. So thank you for attention.
So I'm just going to be building on this excellent presentation by Raphaël when it comes to the Mobitron and its use for clinical translation of ultra-high dose rate electron therapy. as Raphaël has already presented on the specifications of the Mobitron, but just in case you called in late or you weren't paying attention, there is a high degree of freedom with this machine in terms of beam parameter settings. This machine in certain aspects is still being optimized, and these are the current settings that I have on my machine. So I have a 6 and 9 MeV Electron flash beam with dose rates up to 600 gray per second, variable pulse width with a dose per pulse up to 5 gray. And then we can obviously switch around with the pulse frequency, and field size is very much dependent on your choice of SSD. Currently, the variation or the switching between your frequencies and the pulse width is an external unit on top of the console, but that is currently being worked into the overall console design. But so based on the original design of the flash-capable Mobitron, that design is now being upgraded through a combination and extension of the technology included in the IntraOp dermatology unit, which can be depicted here. Externally, what this gives us is then updated features of an integrated display, which you can see in this slide here, with basic gantry angle and tilt parameters, as well as collimator rotation angle. Also in here, we now have an integrated SSD lasers for distance, as well as a light field and a crosshair, which cannot be underestimated. It's a very important feature for any type of clinical translation where you really want to see where you're at, because you're setting this up, at least originally, with a clinical setup. So seeing the light field and having the crosshair is actually shown to be quite important when we have talked to our physicians about this clinical translation step of this unit. Internally, though, a redesign of the head then allowed an integration of the toroids that Raphaël was presenting on. So this is the original design of the flash-capable Mobitron, which you then have your waveguide, and your pencil beam comes in here. You then have your scattering, your first scatter, second scatter. This will be your ion chamber, and then this is where you then connect your cone towards the patient. The first instance of upgrade here was then this integrated toroid. So a smaller toroid by the primary collimator, and then a larger one before exiting the head. And this is then how a schematic of the head of the current Linac that we have, where we've also then added on these optics. That for us is an important aspect of this. These are just a little bit more detail on what I just said, and as this is recorded, I wanted to include that so that everyone has access to it. One aspect of this redesign was that you then get a longer head, which obviously results in a longer SSD. Then to compensate for this, as obviously distance, you lose output. Then the collimators or the applicators were redesigned. So these were the original applicators that came with the original Flash Mobitron. And when we then upgraded the head of the Mobitron, we also then shortened the applicator length to allow still a high output from the machine, but still having enough room to then integrate all the optics that we feel was important for the next step in our translation. But so back on the toroid side, we've already seen these results from Raphaël. So these were the original data that was now published just a few months ago, showing that these beam current transformers can really be used for high precision and really looking at the details of the beam. They are linear with dose as well as high stability, which is also something that we see on our integrated design. So just as very basic, this is the signal. If you're looking at the raw signal, you get a signal impulse, and you have your time. Looking into a pulse, you then get the entire pulse structure from this. This is then an example of a 1.2 microsecond pulse. The black here, so I apologize about the disconnect about the color here, but the black is the upper toroid, which then in this design has a smaller diameter and a more concentrated beam, so therefore you have a higher signal there compared to the lower one, which is at the exit of the head of the linac. But this is the pulse structure you will see, and then you will have them depending on how many pulses you then deliver, obviously. So it allows for also a pulse-to-pulse analysis of your beam. Again, I didn't want to go too much into this because it's already been presented that this is the case. But if you look at the integrated signal versus dose, we see very nice linearity on both the upper and the lower toroid that we have in this design. And this is also then linear with the dose per pulse as well as repetition frequencies that we are using on it. And we were also preparing a more detailed analysis on this, and hopefully be presenting that in the near future. But it's just some conclusions and some next steps on all of this. So conclusion-wise, this platform is scalable based on the original Mobitron architecture that while in its current configuration, it looks the same as the original IRT unit. A lot has happened on the inside of this to accommodate a clinical translation. There is now a dual monitor system that has been integrated into the head of this, so we're now can come closer to the way that we usually do beam monitoring with our dual transmission ion chambers. Obviously here we then transfer that over to a dual Tora design. There are obviously other limitations that I haven't brought up here that not to discuss, but we at least have this redundancy system if this is ever gonna be then developed into a full dose control unit. And that is where we then come into the future development. These toroids is the hope then to develop for a dose monitoring and control. And with control, then we're talking about potentially introducing a dynamic pulse structure control, so that you can set the dose that you want, and then the pulse structure will be modified accordingly, and then also real-time modification of the pulse in order to get you the dose that was prescribed. How exactly that is implemented is still being discussed and worked on. Because also we have these dual toroids, one at the just by the initial scatter and one before it exits, we also hope to be able to use these for energy evaluation or constancy measurement when it comes to energy. And of course, in the end, also bring all of this into a record to record these current transformer signals for documentations, so a logging of the treatment that is being given. So with that, I just want to thank you all for listening, and obviously thank my amazing team that I'm working with at MD Anderson, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I can read it out. So with a current transformer, one can have online monitoring of the charge and dose. Would an online monitoring of the transverse dose distribution also be interesting? I just gave a talk including a proposal for that in Hall C. This is from Frank Stefan. So it would be looking then at monitoring of the transverse dose distribution. So the profiles, I would assume.
Yeah, the profile. Yeah, of course. This is a limitation of the BCTs in general. This is giving say point information or 1D information, not in time but in space. So this is mainly giving information in space for about the pulse structure, but that's correct that this is not monitoring the geometry of the beam, so to say, as it is done with the usual transmission chamber with the four positions that we have in conventional Linac. So this is probably solving some of the problems or the questions for safety. Now the other question is it really absolutely necessary to have online monitoring of a profile when we radiate during 100 milliseconds and due also to the fact that maybe the stability of the different machines is quite good in terms of geometry. So, but still, this is correct that the BCTs are not solving the question of measuring the profile online.
Yeah, I agree, and then so obviously there's the legal perspective of what we need to monitor, and then there is what can actually change. As in this instance, we have an inline waveguide, so we don't have any bending magnets or anything like that that can skew a profile from one to another. The only reason that profile would change would be then the energy, most likely. And in that instance, we are hoping to use the toroids, the dual toroid design for energy monitoring, which would then indicate if also a profile change could occur.
Yeah, also in the astrophysics workshops this year about FLASH, that the question of what is necessary to check, particularly in ultra high dose rate, has been raised, and also saying that we are living with information and quality of machines that is 25 years old or something like that, and maybe that the different tests or controls that we should do according to the regulation might be a bit changed or adapted according to the quality of the different device we have now. And it's not been done because it was not necessary for conventional units, so to say. But now with UHDR, maybe this is the good time to provide information to the regulators to say, okay, are you sure that we still need to control this or that? So that was one of the topics, and Astra will continue after the workshop to work, and that a sub-working group will work on that to provide maybe different propositions for that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and do not hesitate to contact me or almost certainly Emil if you have additional questions or for discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.